This is a man's world, sings James Brown. And he's right. This planet suffers from an overdose of patriarchy. And this is, of course, great when you're a man. It gives you status and privilege and someone who looks up to you, your wife. Even if you're a drunk and lazy bum nobody in his right mind would touch with a 10-foot pole, country music suggests that she stands by her man. After all, he's just a man. But he's wearing the pants, and that in itself is a great accomplishment because it takes a real genius to pull them up. And because men have so incredible intellectual capabilities, they get to name stuff. Adam in the garden invents names for all the animals God creates. And following this time-tested tradition, what do you think man called the dominant primate species that has spread all over the globe? Homo sapiens, if you're a scientist with Latin leanings. But most commonly, we call ourselves mankind. Man. Diabolicum, the upright gate, is described as the ascent of man. Stuff we use is man-made. And your neighbor is your fellow man, even if she's a woman. And women are emotional beings, incapable of rational thought, because they are victims of their raging hormones. And that's why many cultures require them to cover themselves or stay hidden and out of sight. You know, the stronger sex, the crown of creation that is capable of incredible rational thought that can unveil the last secrets of the universe, has distinct difficulties to keep his pants up when he sees women. If women would just run around as they are, men foam from the mouth and grunt like pigs wallowing in a mud hole. And naturally, that has nothing whatsoever to do with man's hormones or emotions. That is an evil spell that women cast upon men. Behavior is a crapshoot in a man's world. And the Me Too campaign proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that many men lack dearly in the decency department. And even if men won't admit it easily, women have always and at all places played a significant role in history. Moses didn't acknowledge women when he came down the mountain, but no women, no Moses. And when God gets angry with Moses and chases him around and wants to kill him, his wife, Shifrah, saves him. She grabs him and circumcises him. And that appeases God for some reason no rabbi was ever able to explain. But Jewish men do likewise to this very day. So let that scene percolate a little bit through your imagination. God on the warpath. The crown of creation runs around like a hysterical chicken and is saved by the quick knife of a woman who thinks on her feet. And that's not the only time Moses owes his life to a woman. His whole existence is based on women doing what is right. The Bible doesn't tell us anything about male resistance to the oppression of the Egyptians. It is women who defy Pharaoh. He wants to kill all male Israelite children because he's afraid there are so many and soon there will be no Egyptians anymore. So, kill them. Genocide is a tried and true male solution to many problems since the dawn of man. But the midwives, Shifrah and Puah, they don't do it. Instead, they pull the story out of thin air that Israelite women give birth so quickly that they can't get there in time to kill the boys. And it takes a real man to believe a weird tale like that. And when Moses is born, his mother hides him. And when she can't do it anymore, she floats him down the river in a basket while his sister closely observes him from the shore. And then the next woman rescues him. She's Pharaoh's daughter, and one would expect that she does what Pharaoh wants. But instead, she does what is right. She saves Moses, and she raises Moses to be the man he needs to be to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Women at all times and in all places have been agents of God's grace. They were chosen by God. They were called by God, and they decided to follow God's call. And more often than not, God's call has to do with defying power, defying custom, and defying man. It has to do with women standing up against all odds and doing what is right. It is overdue that we recognize that. Old Testament and New Testament, the Bible is full of women man would have loved to write out of the book, but they can't, because these women were put into the path of history by God's own hand. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Right? The founding fathers of our nation. So what about women? Even though the inclusion of women was discussed at the time, man ultimately decided against it. Male wisdom at its best. So, don't worry, women. We men got you covered, and we like our beer cold and our slippers warm. But when you relegate just one person to inferior status, you set in motion a self-sustaining system that will never stop. Hence, the blessings of liberty were not bestowed upon women, and black people, Native Americans, indentured servants, and white men without property. At the inception of our country, liberty is basically for rich white guys. And it would have stayed like that till all eternity if the disenfranchised would just have been silent and followed custom and did what they were told. But the beauty of our founding documents is that they reach beyond their time, which for me is God's hand in history. And that's why these documents are still relevant, and that's why they are the basis for liberty for all. For me, that is how God works. Like water carving out the Grand Canyon, God chips at injustice. And injustice is like a stream, says the prophet Amos. Poor, rich, white guys. They could have such a nice time if it weren't for those pesky people that their spirit inspired to demand their share of the pie by waiving the Constitution. Most of the time, that is a long shot at best, because no privileged class of people have ever given up their privileges out of the goodness of their hearts. It always needed God's Spirit to empower the oppressed and the poor to stand up for equality for all, to stand up for God's kingdom here on earth. And that process is obviously ongoing. It will never stop until we live as sisters and brothers that are guided by God's call to love each other. And until we have created a culture of universal love for God and neighbor, our city on the hill is still a work in progress. And as we journey down the path of Jesus, we have to remind ourselves of the following. If we don't mind that someone, and it really doesn't matter who it is, if we don't mind that someone is treated like a lesser being, paid less for the same work, valued less for the work they do, is given less opportunities, we have to remember that indifference is contagious. When we watch until they are done with women, with black people, with Jews, Asians, Native Americans, and whoever is lower on the totem pole than we are, sooner or later, and that is as sure as the amen in church, sooner or later, we are next. And then it will be our turn to be trampled into the dust. And when those who are still left might care as little about us as we couldn't be bothered with the fate of those who were cast aside before it was our turn. God created us all. The first chapter of Genesis says, God created them male and female. And since that day, women are part of God's plan and agents of God's grace. So, women, follow God's call. Raise your voices, be bold, courageous, and do not be afraid, because God is with you. And to my fellow man, through women, God is speaking to us. And that means, shut up. Amen.